This podcast is sponsored by FlyingEagleGold.com. When you start looking at the money side of your prep plan and you want to be able to preserve the wealth of your savings, whether it's the amount of money you have sitting in your safe at home, how much you've got buried in the backyard, how much you have in the bank, at some point you're going to realize that money is worth less and less every year. In order to preserve that wealth, you should be looking at hard assets like gold and silver. Gold and silver have an excellent reputation of maintaining their value despite what the world economy does. If you haven't considered gold and silver before, now's the time to do your own research, check out the economy, check out history and performance of gold and silver, and when you're ready, give Jeff a call at FlyingEagleGold.com. Hey folks, Rob Hannes here of the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. On this great thing we call the internet, you can find us at thepreparednesspodcast.com, and you can email me directly at rob@prepcast.info. This podcast is going to be a little bit different. It's somewhat of a celebration because a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, we hit download number 500,000, 500,000 downloads, and that is in about 2.5 years. So we're pretty stoked about that. I know that there are more because I didn't start tracking until 2 years into this podcast venture. So there's more there, although probably not too much more because we were still new and stuff. And I know that 250,000 downloads happened just last year, 2012. So, but we're pretty stoked about this. And I thought what we would do is we would have some listener feedback. And basically, I'm going to go over some comments and some posts and maybe some questions that you have written in. What I want to do primarily is address some of these comments that I get in the PodTrack listener survey, and these are completely anonymous. I can't respond to them in any other way because I don't know who made the comment. So good or bad, or if somebody had a question, like somebody made a comment about volume, and I'm unable to ask that person what was that? What did that mean? Is it too loud, too soft? So I thought I'd take this time. It's going to be a little more casual, and I know those don't necessarily come out so well sometimes, but we're going to see how it goes. And by the way, if you're the person who made the comment in the listener survey about the volume, I'd be very interested to know, was that too loud or too soft? Because I'm trying to make sure there's enough volume here so that you don't have to crank your music player all the way up. It's always easier to turn down than it is up, but you know what? Let me know so I can try to fix it. What I had planned originally was for my wife, Amy, to read the question or the comment, and then I would respond to it. However, one of the issues that I'm having is I don't have two good headsets. I record this with a headset, and I like that because the microphone's always the same distance from my mouth, no matter where whether I'm leaning forward or back or standing or sitting, the microphone is always the same distance, and that helps provide very consistent volume levels. This is also one of the reasons we haven't gotten to do the spouse show yet, is because I'm trying to find a headset that I can borrow that is a good enough quality, that has some good sound quality. Now, I do have another microphone. It's a recording microphone, and it works very well. The problem, though, is when you have two people in the same room, because I'm just in a house. I don't have a recording studio. So the sound bounces off the walls, and it gets picked up on this other microphone. And so you have one person speaking in one channel and then the other person speaking in both channels. And it's very difficult to mix the sound so that you don't have this weird echo happening. So that's just a minor look into the technical side here on the podcast. Also, I've noticed when I go back and listen to this audio, I'm starting to pick up some static on this headset, which tells me that the cords are starting to fray inside. And so if you hear some electronic static or a little bit scratching noise, that's what's going on. And I don't know what's happening until it's recorded. And chances are it's not bad enough for me to go back, so I just leave it in there. So not much we can do about that. Now, the first set that I want to get through are these likes and dislikes from the listener survey. I'm not going to read all the likes. This isn't a pump-up show. I'm not going to pat myself on the back. I want to address questions and comments. Back in July of 31, 2012, somebody had written, love the show, just a suggestion, however, and they were saying to add or mention a list of all the websites that we're discussing during the show. Now, this came out before I started the new podcast, or right around the same time, and so hopefully I've gotten better at that. I'm trying to do much better notes. In fact, you'll see a lot of the show notes for the podcast are very, very, very similar to what I actually speak on the podcast, and we'll cover that in a little bit as to why. On August 5th, a listener had written that one of the things they didn't like was too few episodes. And this is actually a common theme in the dislike column of people saying they want a show every day, they want more shows. Well, I'd like to do an everyday show if I could get away with it. I don't think right now that's possible. It takes a lot of production time to do the podcast that I am doing. As you can tell, I have a hard time getting 3 podcasts out. That's my goal. Last week I got 1. This week, I don't know if you noticed, but I actually put a podcast out on Monday. But you may not have realized it until Wednesday, because what happened was I forgot to actually upload the XML file. So if you went to the website, you could have listened to the podcast, or if you went to YouTube, you could have listened to the podcast, because I was accessing the file directly, but the XML file that all the other feeds pull from, FeedBurner and Stitcher and iTunes, they all pull from the same XML file. And without uploading that updated file, nobody knew that there was a podcast out there. So I realized that on Wednesday morning, and I changed it, and that's when people started, were able to listen to stuff. So again, it's one of the things that I just didn't have the time to do a podcast every day. There's a lot of production that goes into this, and at some point I'd like to. We'll just have to see where fate takes us. On August 9th of 2012, had a listener fill out in the like column. He said, "It makes me consider things that I had not thought of. As the saying goes, it's not what you know, but what you don't know." And so he liked it because it helped to expand his thinking. Well, I'm glad that is. That's part of why I'm doing this, is because, preparedness is such a encompassing, comprehensive skill set. If you like to ride horses, if you like to collect art, or if you like to work with wood, or almost any other hobby is relatively narrowly focused. Which, I think is what's great about those hobbies, because it allows you to focus and concentrate on one thing and be able to master that as far as you want to take it. With preparedness, you have to know so many things in order to actually have a good breadth of knowledge. Food storage, cooking, you need to know about shelf life, you need to know about ingredients, you need about water storage, water filters, iodine, chlorine, what the difference is, how does it work, how to make an expedient filter. You need to know about building shelter, you need to know how to stay warm, how to build a fire, what fires work better, what woods are better. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and you can cover, let's call it schmillions of topics in just the core basic stuff for food, water, shelter, fire, first aid, and air. There's so much there to know that it just goes on and on. So I fully know that every podcast, when I talk about a single topic, like last podcast was about 72-hour kits, I was going over the show in spots to see what the quality is, because I know this microphone is going, so I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any bad spots in the audio. I was going over the list a couple days ago, and I realized that there were some things that I hadn't talked about. There's some things that I missed, some things that I wanted to say, and that's because there's so many tips and so many ways of doing things and so many different ideas and accomplishing the same goal that it's very difficult to talk about it all. So that's one of the reasons why I'll cover a topic more than once, is because every time I touch upon it, I'm probably giving different information than I had the last time. Now, this same listener had a dislike, and he doesn't like the talk about guns due to him, I guess, him or her being in Australia. It has no relevance to them. So I understand that. I'm sorry you're in a situation where you can't have guns, whether you would have them or not. I know a lot of people don't because they don't like guns. However, in America, we do have the Second Amendment. It is a big fight that's going on right now. I believe very strongly in the Second Amendment. I believe that I should have the right to carry and own weapons for my not only enjoyment and entertainment and hunting and stuff, but really it's for freedom. It is what keeps us free. And I'm a very strong proponent of that. And I even had a Twitter conversation with somebody from, I think it was England, and they could not understand why we were so obsessed with guns over here. And quite honestly, they're not going to know. They grew up in an environment where it's taboo to be able to own a personal firearm for protection or protection against tyranny, which is really what the Second Amendment is about. Now, I haven't touched on guns since I relaunched the podcast. We did cover it, I think, probably the first year the podcast came out. Me and the boys talked about it a bunch. I do plan on doing it again soon. I actually have it in the syllabus for that series of 12 that I had outlined a couple podcasts ago. So we're going to be covering it again, and I make no bones about it. I make no apologies for it. If you can own a gun and want to own a gun, then I think you should, and I think you should get the training so you can handle it properly. And if you don't want to own a gun, then that's your prerogative. On August 10th, I had a dislike for the truck noise in the background. Yeah, you know what? People either liked that or hated that. There didn't seem to be any middle ground there. And I sort of liked it because it kind of filled the background behind my voice, so it wasn't just, like a disembodied voice there. But you know what? I didn't really like the quality of them in general, so probably won't hear that again. I won't say never, but my goal is to be able to do them like I am, so the quality of the audio is there. You can hear the voice much clearer and not have to worry about background noise. On August 25th, had a like about the shorter episodes. And that's another issue that we have with people liking and disliking. We have some people who like the longer episodes, and we have some people who like the shorter episodes. And it's really difficult to hit a target where everybody says, oh, yeah, that's a good length. So what I'm doing is I am talking about a topic for as long as it takes to talk about that topic, and then I'm done. Lately, I think I've been fairly consistent at hitting the 35-minute mark, and it's kind of weird because I don't actually plan it that way. I don't plan it to end right then. It just seems that the topics that I'm choosing, I can finish up in that amount of time. So based on the feedback that I get, I think a lot of people also listen either to or from work, and I think the shorter podcasts make it easier to do that within a specified period of time. This same listener in the dislike column basically said he missed Greg and wanted Greg to come back for an interview, and we ended up actually doing that in a podcast not that long ago. The next few, maybe the next 6 or so, in the likes column, the topics were pretty much about how people liked the topics, the variety of topics, the well-researched and presented information, how there was very little discussion about politics and unrelated topics to preparedness. So that is actually what we try to do. So I really enjoyed seeing those because that let me know that I was accomplishing what I set out. However, if you hear me stray from that, please let me know. Either send me an email or fill out another listener survey and put it in the dislikes column. Now, in the same period of time, we had a couple people complain about the advertising. One person said that they didn't like the integration of the commercials into the topic discussed. You know what? I don't have a good formula for this. As I explained before, we do need to have some sort of revenue generation to keep this podcast going. It does cost money for the server and the bandwidth. I won't even get into the production time and stuff because right now we're still just trying to cover basic business costs. So we have to do that at some point, and I'll be honest, we're still playing around with what works best for us. Lately, I've stuck them in the beginning. I've had them in the middle, trying all sorts of things to see what works the best. I am choosing advertisers that I think have great products. I think they are things that you should look at and stuff. So I'm not just pushing, hefty garbage bags or something that, is mundane, or a product that isn't something that I think is a decent quality product. So I think the advertising is worthwhile. I think when I talk about the advertisers, I'm trying to push some information that either you haven't heard before, haven't thought about before, or a reminder. I will say, though, that we are looking into other ways that we can generate revenue, whether possibly going to a what they call donationware, which is where it's supported by donations or something. I don't know. We're constantly trying to look at this business model and see how we can optimize it and make it better for everybody. On September 24th, I had a listener who, in the like column, said, generic enough for beginners, but has enough meat that all levels of preppers can pick up something constructive. And that's exactly what I'm trying to structure this with. I don't view prepping as anything advanced or complicated. It's just very comprehensive. There's a lot of little details that goes into being prepared. And so by addressing topics, like one topic at a time, or one part of a topic or an aspect, I'm hoping to be able to give information where the beginner prepper can take that information and use it as they're getting prepared, and the prepper who's been around for a while and has a little more experience can pick up some new tips. Because I know when I go to any sort of prepper meeting, there's several prepper meetups here in the Phoenix Valley area, and I'm actually part of 2 or 3 of them, and it's becoming more and more difficult to get to the meetings because there's starting to be so many, and with kids and family and work and stuff, and getting out the podcast, time starts to become an issue. But what I like about them is, even though that they're still relatively fundamental, basic, I still pick up tips. Somebody will do something differently. Somebody will have figured out a way to store water better, or a tip to do this, or a trick to do that. And to me, that is why I go. I go to find those little tricks of the trade, so to speak, that make doing things easier or more efficient that I hadn't thought about, because that's how I can streamline my preps, how I can do things better. And yes, a lot of times you have to listen to the same information over and over, but the trick is to not go glassy-eyed and actually look for those little tips and tricks that are hidden in nearly every time somebody starts talking about how they're doing things, because we all do things differently. On September 30th, in the dislike column, now just to let you know, like I said, there are likes and dislikes for just about everything I'm reading here. I'm not covering everything. I'm only covering the salient points about comments that need to be addressed. I have received a lot of great comments in the likes column, and even quite honestly, a lot of the dislikes in the dislike column aren't really dislikes. They're things like, oh, I wish there were more shows, or I didn't like the hiatus, and stuff like that. So I really appreciate all these comments that are here, because that lets me know that I'm giving you the material and the information that you could use. Speaking of hiatus, there is a comment here on September 30th about not liking the hiatus, and I did explain this back in episode 114. It wasn't planned, but when it happened, I actually didn't plan to come back, and so, sometimes that's just how things work. On October 21st, I had somebody mark in the dislike column, sometimes the podcasts that come out are not what Rob told us to expect. Like, I'm still waiting for the podcast on how to get your spouse involved with prepping. Yes, I know. I can't believe it actually goes all the way back to October. My wife and I don't mean to make excuses, but the gosh honest truth is that we're trying. We've actually scheduled several times, and either my wife has to do something, or one of our kids gets sick, or she has to go do something, or she's working on the website, or something is always happening. And now, the last time we did it, we went to go, and I'm like, I'm not sure how I'm going to record your voice and my voice at the same time. So I need to find a headset to borrow is basically what it comes. But I know we do have it planned. I have it on the syllabus in the series of 12 shows, a podcast I was talking about. I think it's like next week. And so I put it on there specifically because at some point we just need to do it. It may not be the best audio quality, but I think at some point we just need to do it. And so that's why I kind of penciled it in. And my goal is to just do it come high water or not. Hopefully we're going to get that done. So, yeah, I know it's been a long time, but again, this is life, and this is how it goes. On October 25th, I had somebody who put a very long comment in the like column, and I only bring it up because they mention about me being down to earth, and I try to be very factual and matter of fact here on the podcast. And I sometimes think, boy, maybe I should make it a little more casual, do a little more humor, make it a little bit more personable. And I'm going to share a secret with you, is that I am still very uncomfortable doing the podcast. I don't know why. I've been doing it for years now. But you know what? I'm not really a speaker. I'm a writer. And my mind doesn't work the same way. I mean, when I write, I can write and I can change what I want to say and refine it and wordsmith it to it sounds good. But when I'm speaking, it's not the same thing. And honestly, I have a little bit of a fear getting in front of this microphone, even though I know I can go back and edit it out, which, believe me, I do. I think it still takes me about an hour and a half worth of recording to produce a half-hour podcast. And that doesn't include the production time afterwards, as far as compressing it and making a YouTube video out of it and creating the graphics that go with it and sticking it up on the website and all the show notes and stuff. That's just the actual recording of it. And I like doing it because I really like helping people. It's one of the things that I have to kind of force myself to do is the podcast, because I don't know why. It's not really a phobia. It's just one of those things that I'm not all that comfortable doing, and it's just because I'm not a speaker. And there's a couple comments that come up later here where one listener very jovially but said there's no X in especially, and some other words that I mispronounce. And I know I do that because I don't know I'm doing when I say it, but when I go back and listen, I hear this, and I'm like, I don't even hear that when I say that. This is one of the things I wanted to bring up, because I wanted to let you, the listener, know that, yes, I do know that I'm not that great of a speaker. I never have been, but there really isn't any other way for me to do a podcast without speaking. Now, believe it or not, I have actually thought about writing out the entire podcast and having the computer speak it, and I just record that, but when I passed that idea to people, nobody seemed to like that. So I guess it means we're just stuck with each other. Continuing on October 29th, one of the listeners had mentioned that episodes do not always load. Now, again, because this is anonymous, I couldn't get with this listener and ask them what episodes couldn't load, how they were trying to do it. If you ever have an issue, or if you notice that there's an episode not loading right, or it's missing, or you click on the play file in the show notes, it's not playing, please let me know. Send me an email to rob@prepcast.info. There's a bunch of little things I need to do to make sure all this gets up and works right. And as we found out earlier this week, I sometimes forget. So just send me a quick note, and I'll get right on that. On October 30th, the listener had made the comment that they liked listening because they feel that they're not the only one. It's comforting to know that somebody else thinks about preparedness too. Yeah, you're definitely not alone. Preppers tend to be rather close-lipped. I think it's becoming more mainstream now with Doomsday Preppers and all these other shows that are out there, and with the internet, there's so much more information available. So it's quite easy to see that there's a lot of people that have an interest in this. However, quite honestly, not as much as there should be. More people should be interested in preparedness, at least to have 1 or 2 weeks worth of of stuff at home, because then things like Hurricane Sandy don't become such a disaster, at least not right away. People can take care of themselves. They can help each other out. Back on November 12th, I had a listener who, in the dislike column, did not like me advising people to buy gold and silver, and thought that gold and silver is a terrible investment. I can't stress how much I disagree with that. I think gold and silver is an excellent investment. Once you start learning about what fiat currency is, fiat money, the Federal Reserve notes, what it really means, and how they can manipulate the value of the dollar, and how the dollar value has been diminishing through inflation and other mechanisms for decades now. When you look at the silver I bought in the 1980s for $4.50, and I can sell that exact same silver today for $31.50, it's pretty clear to see that it may not be an investment that you can retire on, but it is an investment at the very least that is going to protect how much you can buy with your dollars. And if there's a currency restructure, if there's a dollar devaluation, if the dollar no longer is the global reserve currency and it crashes and loses all its value virtually overnight, which is probably what we would see, you're going to see everybody flocking to gold and silver because they want to be able to put it into something that has real value. The U.S. dollar does not have real value. It has perceived value, and that perceived value is only relevant as long as people perceive it to have that value. Gold and silver aren't the same way. Gold and silver is a index value. It's like a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread, it doesn't matter how much that loaf of bread costs. What is the value to you in being able to feed your family with that loaf of bread? There's that intrinsic value in there that you have to consider. And honestly, much like everything else I try to talk about on this podcast is based on my experience. I don't tell you that you should really look at gold and silver because everybody else is telling you it. I'm telling you it because I've done the research, and this is what I believe, and this is what I do, and I'm trying to pass this information to you. Again, you need to do your own research because it's only by actually looking at history and the facts and figures yourself do you really understand what's happening with gold and silver. And that's why I talk about it, because I know the value of it. Now, and again, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying that you should dump all of your savings or you should cash out of your 401k or whatever. I can't tell you to do that. That would be completely a personal decision. What I would suggest, though, is that you look at putting a portion of your savings so that if everything else went to zero, at least you would still have some value that you can go out and buy some milk and eggs and bread and fuel with it if you need to. Now, it's kind of old, but I'm bringing it up because I want to basically let everybody know. If you can't download something, like this comment from November 14th said that they can't download old shows to their MP3 player and they don't use iTunes. I'd like to know if this is still a problem because I want to get it fixed. I want to be able to have these podcasts available. So whether it's you or if you've had this issue or any time that you find you can't access the material for whatever reason, let me know. The email comes directly to me and I'll be able to jump on it as soon as I can. Another consistent dislike that I get about the podcast is this manner of inconsistent days that the podcast comes out. Yep, I agree with this, and I know it's inconsistent. I'm trying to be better about it. I shoot for Mondays and Wednesdays, and then another one if I can get one in. But quite honestly, I have 3 little kids. I have an 11, a 9, and a 6-year-old. We have to do homework. We have to do all sorts of things with them. Sometimes they get sick. My wife has a job. I have a job. And so it's just a lot to juggle. And sometimes I either don't have the energy or I don't have the time. And not to say that the podcast comes last, but my family comes first. And I hope you can understand that I am trying to do the best I can and get them out when I can. But on the other hand, it's a podcast, not a radio show, and I do enjoy the flexibility of being able to put out the podcast when I can. I haven't done this yet, but I suppose if there was a time where I could actually put 5 podcasts out in a week, I would probably do it because I do enjoy putting them out. I enjoy doing the content and helping people. But, sometimes I just can only do the one. There was another comment in here about the gaps in podcasts without any warning. That happened before I rebooted this. And, yeah, it did. I would stop for a week or two or a month or something like that without any notice. I'm trying to be better as far as telling you, like over Christmas break, I said that, hey, this will probably be the last podcast of the year because, holidays and family coming in and stuff like that. So I am trying to be better about that. On November 24th, I had a listener take me to task about not knowing basic tools. He said I seem not to know one end of a screwdriver from the other. Yeah, you know what? I think that it probably came across that way. I think I know at what point in the tool podcast he was referring to. This was, if you haven't heard it, or as a reminder, this is when I had Greg on and I was talking about basic tools and stuff. And I remember very clearly, he's talking about Phillips and standard screwdrivers, and I'm looking at my notes and sockets and looking at metric. And I said something about metric, and I'm sure that came off really poorly, and I didn't even realize it until later. But you know what? Sometimes that's what happens on the show. Especially with an interview. Oh, and that's something else I wanted to mention. Interviews. Somebody had said they wish I would do more interviews, and I like doing interviews because, quite honestly, it's less work for me and more information for you. But here's the thing: is coordinating with the guest is an issue. I've had people drop out simply because the timing schedule didn't work. But also there's a stress because we use Skype. And it's an imperfect technology. Sometimes the connection isn't really good, and I have to constantly, hey, let me call you back. And then there's the recording of the interview itself. If you remember the interview with Vincent Cate on the hyperinflation fact, that almost didn't get to air because the recording I had was unusable. What happened was I have a mute button on my headset here, and I would mute it while Vincent was talking so I could sniffle and cough and sneeze and clear my throat and stuff like that, and talk to the kids or whatever. I don't know if Vincent can hear that, but it was on the recording. It came through the recording because I wasn't using the mute button on the microphone. I was using the mute button on Skype or the recorder or whatever it was, but it wasn't being muted. So I hope Vincent didn't hear that because I think that would have been rude while he was talking. But it made the recording completely unusable. Now, luckily, I had an app that basically records all Skype calls, and I was able to take that one and use that. Now, I had to do a lot of post-production on that audio file to get it to be usable, but luckily I had it, so it wasn't complete waste. But there's a lot of stress when you have, especially some higher-level guests. You don't want to take up their time. You don't want to waste their time. And so, making sure everything runs smoothly and stuff, there's a bit of a stress factor there. So I haven't done any lately. I do hope to do more this year, but sometimes the logistics just don't work out. On December 11th, I had a comment, and it was clearly about older podcasts because it was talking about how sometimes the guys either don't talk or talk over each other. And that is a pain. That is an issue we had when I had the guys on doing the podcast with me. And what causes that is the delay in Skype. There's just enough of delay that human speech patterns, we have kind of learned that after a certain period of pausing, it's okay to start talking. And what happens is there's just enough delay in Skype that we think the other person has stopped talking, and so we'll talk, but the person on the other side gets just a little bit extra pause, and they feel that nobody else is going to talk, so they start talking, and that's what causes us to talk over a lot, which is why now when I do interviews, I try to make it very much of a question-answer sort of period because that's what happens. And if you listen to other interviews on Skype, you'll notice that there's that delay there, and that's exactly what they're doing too, is they're asking a question, and then they're stopped talking, and they're waiting for the response, because otherwise, if you actually try to have a conversation back and forth, you do a lot of stopping and starting because you're talking over each other. On December 30th, I had a comment that basically said the website could be improved and more smartphone compatible. Again, this is one of those things that if you're having issues accessing the podcast or the website, I'd like to know. I mean, when I look at it on my iPad or my iPhone, it seems to look fine. I don't have an Android device. I'd like to know how it looks, or a BlackBerry or whatever else is out there. Again, I'm trying to make this content as easily accessible for people as possible. So any sort of glitches and stuff, let me know. I've got just a few more I want to cover before we close out this podcast. On January 19th, one of the dislikes was that I didn't go deep enough into the content sometimes and really just only touched on the surface, which I have to say I don't necessarily disagree with. I'm under the opinion that preparation and survivalism, preparing and being prepared isn't really all that complicated. It's really once you wrap your head around the items and the things that you need to be prepared, it's really just a matter of getting it done. However, at the same time, there are so many different aspects to talking about a topic that I could do a podcast on almost any given topic for hours and try to just give out all the experience and all the stuff I've done and tried and all that stuff, and really I think at some point it would get really boring. So what I try to do is I try to touch these topics periodically when they come up, and always give a different aspect or a different point of view on that topic, which is also why I like to have guests on, because you get another point of view. At the same time, though, if you would like to know more about something that we've just covered, and you're like, oh, you just stopped short of what I was hoping you'd get at, send me a tweet or on Facebook or an email and let me know so that we can cover that more in depth. Now, I'm going to jump back to December 28th because this is the last point that I want to talk about. And I had a very long comment in the dislikes, but the point that stuck out to me was if I can't take live calls, why not ask for questions from Facebook and Twitter and spend some time talking about those questions? And that, I think, is an excellent idea. In fact, I'm going to try to remember to if I don't have a whole syllabus for the next 12 podcasts like I like to do, but at least try to narrow down a topic that's coming up soon, whether it's the next podcast or one coming up. And I'm going to say, okay, this topic's coming up. What are your questions on it? What would you like me to cover and stuff like that? You guys can let me know either email or Twitter or Facebook, and then I think that would hopefully that'll work a little bit better and get more of the information that you're looking for. And so if you want to do that through Facebook, that's at facebook.com/preparedness podcast. There's no the in there, just preparedness podcast. On Twitter, you can follow us on, it's Prepcast, just PREPCAST. And, of course, email rob@prepcast.info. And there's also a contact form on the website itself. So this has been the podcast that we kind of say, yay, we've hit 500,000 downloads. I'm hoping that we can break 1 million by the end of this year. We'll have to see how that goes. I enjoy doing them, and I really thank you for downloading and listening to the podcast. I do appreciate your comments, both good and bad. And I thought I'd take this time on this podcast to go over a lot of the comments that you have been making, because as I said, on the survey, the listener survey, they're anonymous. I can't ask questions. I can't address them. So I thought we'd take this time and just kind of step back and cover some of this stuff and cover some of the points that I've been coming from. And so keeping with what I just said I was going to do, the next podcast is going to be about mobile apps for preppers. Our smartphones, our mobile devices have become so ubiquitous and so prevalent in our society now that I think that there is, I think these do add a level of preparedness that we can use to our advantage. So if you have any questions or comments about them, or if you have any apps that you find particularly useful for preppers or prepper information, stuff like that, go ahead and let me know through Facebook, Twitter, or email, and I'll see about incorporating that into the show. being that this is Thursday night and most of you will listen to it probably through Monday, I'm probably not going to put out another podcast this week, not only so that you guys can get your questions and comments in, but also under the wire here, really feeling the pressure to get the final draft completed for the preparedness capability checklist. I have people every day asking about when it's going to be ready, and I really want to get this out. And it's been, again, family and work and stuff like that. And I don't mean to keep making excuses, but I actually took some time off from work tomorrow to work specifically on this. And it is going to be a huge focus for me, and I may go down to one podcast a week until it's done. I know I said this before, and I kind of felt bad about not putting out more because that was my initial goal, but really I need to buckle down and get this done. And so we may just take a break, slow down a little bit. So probably looking to do the mobile app podcast beginning of next week. So if you have any questions or comments, get them in. Probably by Monday. But other than that, that pretty much wraps it up for this podcast. Until next time, enjoy life and be safe.